My son said it so easily, like commenting on the weather. "You're not a priority anymore, Dad." Just like that. No pause, no shame, no hint of what I'd meant to him for 45 years. I stood by the kitchen counter holding a newly sharpened saw, a tool I'd been meaning to lend him for a project at their house. It felt heavy in my hands, and suddenly I didn't know what to do with it. They didn't know I was in the hallway. I had just let myself in like I always used to. I still had my spare key, though something told me I wouldn't for much longer. I heard voices from the living room, low and fast, just enough to make me pause. "Your dad is too much," Sandra was saying, her voice tight, dropping by unannounced, offering advice we didn't ask for. "It's like he wants to run our lives." "I know," Jeff replied, "but I've told him he's not a priority anymore. We've got our own life. He needs to back off. Not a priority." I stood there for a few seconds, unsure if my knees would hold. Not busy, not overwhelmed, just not a priority. I quietly opened the front door and stepped back outside, making sure it clicked softly behind me. The saw I left on the front steps, leaning against a potted fern. The drive home was silent. No music, no radio, just the sound of my own breathing and the occasional creak of the old pickup. The same truck Jeff had begged me to buy him 12 years ago for college, saying it would help him move furniture for extra cash. I'd bought it, of course, that and everything else. Back in my kitchen, I made myself a cup of black coffee. The machine whirred like it always had. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. I sat at the little round table with the chipped edge and stared at the wall. There were pictures on it. Jeff at age 4, grinning without front teeth, holding a fish almost as big as he was. Jeff at his high school graduation with me beside him, my hand tight on his shoulder. Our family vacation to the Grand Canyon in 1996. All of it. Mine, my moments, my sacrifices, my pride. I raised him alone. His mother left when Jeff was 10. I never blamed the boy. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. I saved for his education. I helped with his first mortgage. I looked after his kids when Sandra went back to work. I never asked for anything in return. Not a thank you, not a card, not even a proper seat at Christmas dinner. But I never expected that I'd become invisible. I didn't cry that night. Not yet. Instead, I opened the drawer where I kept my financial files. I hadn't looked in there for months, maybe years. Old check stubs, bank statements, a folder labeled Jeffrey. I had written his name in careful block letters. There were receipts, private school fees, camp payments, orthodontist bills, the down payment for their current house. Over $180,000 in total, I realized flipping through. I never saw it that way before. I didn't give him money. I gave him peace of mind, freedom, opportunity, and now I wasn't even a priority. I didn't sleep that night. I moved from the chair to the window and back again. I thought about all the times I swallowed small humiliations for the sake of family harmony, about how Sandra never looked me in the eye, how the kids didn't know my birthday unless it popped up on Facebook, how Jeff hadn't offered a genuine handshake in years. I thought about the will too. My house was modest but paid off. I had some investments left from my years at the factory and my wife's pension. Nothing extravagant, but enough to make a difference, especially to people like Jeff, who always had a need. But now I wasn't a priority, so maybe it was time I made some changes. Quiet ones like I'd always made, but this time not for them, for me. I woke early the next morning without needing an alarm. My body was restless, as if it hadn't forgotten what happened the night before. The words echoed again before my feet even touched the floor. "You're not a priority anymore." I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, watching the light stretch across the carpet, the kind of pale morning sun that used to feel peaceful. Today it only showed me dust in the corners and how thin my patience had become. I made coffee, not the fancy kind Jeff and Sandra drink, but the instant one I've always kept in the tin. A teaspoon, boiled water, black. The mug warmed my hands, but not much else. When the cup was empty, I walked to the old oak desk in the living room, the one that used to belong to my father. I opened the main compartment and pulled out the brown envelope, where I kept what I called my emergency list. It wasn't really for emergencies. It was a habit I picked up after Jeff left for college, just a way to keep track of where the money went. I laid the documents out on the table one by one. $3,200 car loan co-signed in 2010, $11,000. Sandra's certification course paid in 3 parts, $7,085 braces for Madison, their eldest, $5,000 temporary help for Jeff's business plan that never got off the ground, $28,000 down payment for the house, Another $9,600 monthly contributions to the kids' school fees for 4 years. And that was just the visible part. There were unrecorded things too. New tools for Jeff's garage, gas cards, Christmas bonus checks. I had told myself every time, this is what family does. This is what love looks like. But love, I'm learning, has another side. One I'd ignored for too long. The mail came mid-morning. I heard the slot click, and a stack of envelopes thudded to the floor. Among them was a glossy invitation with gold lettering. You're invited. Sandra's business launch event. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or tear it in half, so I didn't either. I slid it under the newspaper and walked away. Around noon, I decided to leave the house. I needed air. I put on my walking shoes and my old canvas jacket and headed toward the park. It was quiet there as always. A few joggers, a couple walking a dog, ducks making lazy paths across the pond. I sat on a bench where Jeff once learned to skip stones. I remembered the way he'd concentrate, furrow his brow, and then cheer when a stone bounced 3 times across the water. I had felt a profound sense of pride that day. Now I sat in the same spot, feeling something like grief. I stayed there for over an hour. When I got home, I called my bank. The woman on the other end had a bright, rehearsed voice. Good afternoon, Riverlands Bank. How can I assist you today? Yes, I said calmly. My name is Leo Baxter. I'd like to speak with someone about pausing my automatic transfers and reviewing the power of attorney on my accounts. There was a pause. Certainly, Mr. Baxter. One moment, please. A minute later, a man named Gerald came on the line. He asked for some details, then politely confirmed. Yes, I had several monthly transfers going to my son's household. Utilities, tuition contributions, one insurance policy. He read them off like items on a grocery list. I'd like them all suspended, I said immediately. Suspended, he repeated. All of them? Yes, every single one. He hesitated. Do you need time to reconsider? We can schedule. No, I interrupted gently. I've considered it for years. I'm only acting on it now. Understood, he said. We'll initiate the pause today, pending your signature at the branch. Thank you, Gerald. He was quiet for a moment, then added, Mr. Baxter, is everything okay? I smiled a little. Yes, I think for the first time in a long while it is. When I hung up, the house felt different. Not empty, not yet peaceful, but something had shifted. I made myself lunch, a simple sandwich and an apple, and ate it at the table where I had once hosted Christmas dinners for 12. I remembered the laughter, the paper crowns, Jeff carving the turkey like he was the man of the house. I let the memories rise and then I let them go. That evening, I took out the file labeled Will and Estate. I placed it on the desk, opened it, and picked up a pen. Tomorrow I'd call my lawyer. The lawyer's office hadn't changed in years. Same wood-paneled walls, same framed certificates, same ticking clock above the door that made every silence feel longer. Gerald Monroe had handled my affairs since before Jeff got married. He was a steady man, the kind who didn't smile unless he meant it and didn't ask more questions than needed. I'd like to update my will, I said, placing the folder on his desk. He opened it slowly, nodding. Anything specific you'd like to change? Yes. I want to remove my son as primary beneficiary, and I want to create a trust for my granddaughter, Lucy. He paused mid-note, then looked up. Is this recent? I smiled faintly. It's been coming for a long time. I just hadn't found the courage to face it. Gerald didn't ask more. Instead, he laid out the options, speaking in his measured voice. We discussed revocable versus irrevocable trusts, lifetime clauses, contingency details. It felt clinical, but I was grateful for that. There was something about being treated like a client instead of a pitiful old man that made the air easier to breathe. As we worked through the paperwork, my mind drifted to Lucy, 18 last spring, always kind, always thoughtful. She was the only one who ever visited without being asked. She brought books, sat on the couch with her knees curled under her, like a cat, and listened when I spoke. Really listened. I'd once given her my father's old pocket watch. She hadn't taken it off since. By the end of the meeting, Gerald gathered the documents into a neat stack. We'll have everything finalized within the week, he said, and I'll update the power of attorney as well. Yes, I nodded. Remove Jeffrey. He hesitated again. You sure? I'm sure. When I left the office, the sun had dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. I walked slowly to the corner, stopped at the coffee shop, and bought myself a small, expensive dark roast. It felt almost silly, but I hadn't bought anything just for me in years. At home, I made a fresh pot of coffee and sat on the porch. The coffee was rich and strong, and I drank it slowly, watching the street as children biked by in pairs. For a moment, I felt like a man again, not just a father or a grandfather or a source of money and help, just Leo, a person with a name and a voice. The phone rang around 6. I recognized the number before I picked up. Jeff. "Hi, Dad," he said. His voice was oddly upbeat, the way it gets when he wants something. "Hey, Sandra and I were thinking, are you free this weekend? Maybe come over for brunch. Lucy will be there." There was something careful in his tone, something rehearsed. I could almost hear Sandra pacing behind him, whispering lines. They'd found out about the accounts, about the lawyer. Something had shifted. "I'll let you know," I said. He paused in surprise. "Is everything okay?" "I think so," I replied. "Why?" "No reason. Just you sound different." "I feel different." Another pause. "Well, let me know." We hung up. I stared at the phone a moment longer, then placed it back in its cradle. That night I didn't sleep, but it wasn't the old kind of sleepless, the restless, heavy kind. It was clearer, quieter. I spent the small hours sorting through things I hadn't touched in years. Photo albums, old workshop blueprints, letters Jeff had written from college back when he still needed me. One particularly creased one read, "Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have done this without you." I ran my fingers over the words, remembering the boy who'd written them, and wondering when exactly he'd disappeared. At some point, I pulled out the model ship I'd been building. I hadn't touched it in months. A fishing trawler for Lucy. She had picked the kit herself on one of our walks downtown. By dawn, I had finished the mast. Saturday arrived with pale sun and an unexpected knock on the door. I wasn't dressed yet, still in my robe, hair a bit disheveled, the coffee machine barely whirring on the stove. I opened the door just a crack, expecting maybe the neighbor with misdelivered mail, but it was Lucy. "Hi, Grandpa," she said softly, holding up a brown paper bag. I brought bagels, everything, and cinnamon raisin. I stepped back without a word and let her in. She moved like she always had, light-footed and quiet, placing the bag on the kitchen counter, opening cupboards without asking, setting out 2 plates and cream cheese. I liked that about her, how she didn't ask if she could help. She just did. We sat at the kitchen table as the steam from my coffee curled into the morning air. "I heard," she said after a long silence. I didn't ask what. "Dad came home from work yesterday fuming," she went on. "Something about your grandfather freezing the accounts and overstepping. He was pacing around like someone stole his keys." I took a slow sip from my mug. He kept saying it wasn't fair, that you didn't tell him, that you were being dramatic. I looked at her. "Do you think I'm being dramatic?" Lucy broke a bagel in half. "I think you're being overdue." I smiled then, really smiled. She reached across the table and touched my hand. "I'm glad you finally did it, Grandpa. You've given them enough. Dad doesn't see it, but I do. All of it. The rides, the tuition, the tools, the way you were always on call for their life." I swallowed against something rising in my throat. "I always thought," she continued, "that if you disappeared one day, they wouldn't notice right away, but the bills would." She said it without cruelty, just truth. The silence stretched. Then softly I asked, "Are you ashamed of me?" Her head snapped up. "What?" Jeff said. "I'm not a priority anymore. That I'm too involved, too much." I paused. Sometimes I wonder if I've made myself ridiculous in giving so much, expecting something back. Lucy's eyes filled with something fierce and sad. "You're not ridiculous. You're rare." The coffee machine clicked off. I got up to make a fresh pot, needing the movement. My hands shook only slightly now, but it was a steady sort of shake, one I knew how to carry. Lucy stayed until noon. We didn't talk about money again. We talked about the model ship I was making her, about her classes, about a boy she liked. Jonas, a music major who wore too many rings but made her laugh. When she left, I stood at the window and watched her walk down the street. She looked back once and waved. That small gesture filled me more than 100 brunches ever could. The rest of the day passed slowly. I did laundry, changed the sheets, watered the hydrangeas, and then sometime after 4, I remembered something that made my chest tighten. Tomorrow was Sandra's birthday. I used to keep a note in my planner. I'd buy her flowers, always lilies, and a gift certificate to that skincare place she liked. One year, I even built her a custom shelf from scratch, despite the arthritis in my hands. This year, I hadn't bought a thing, and for once, I didn't feel guilty. I wondered if they'd notice, if they'd call and ask if I'd forgotten, if they'd be surprised to learn I hadn't, that I simply chose not to act. At 7, the phone rang. I didn't answer. At 7:30, another ring, then a text. "Hi, Dad. Just wondering if you're feeling okay. Sandra sends her love." I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the drawer where I kept my old notebooks, the ones with garage layouts and half-written thoughts. I found one page from last winter, just a line I must have written in a moment of pain. They only love the part of me that provides. I stared at the sentence for a long time. Then on the line beneath it, I wrote, "Let them learn to love the part that doesn't." Sunday morning began with a breeze carrying the scent of cut grass through the open window. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, slowly slicing an apple. The house was quiet. So quiet it felt like it was listening to me breathe. That silence had once frightened me. Now it felt like a clean page. By noon, I'd received 3 more texts from Jeff. "Dad, did you get my message? Sandra's wondering if you're okay. Call when you have a moment, please." Not a single mention of her birthday, just vague concern, suspiciously timed, as if it were ticking alongside a realization. At 2:15, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I paused mid-sweep, my broom still in hand. I glanced through the peephole. It was Jeff. I didn't hesitate. I opened the door. He stood there with a strange mix of confidence and discomfort, wearing his weekend polo and that faintly furrowed brow he'd had since childhood whenever he rehearsed lines in his head. "Hi," he said. "Hi." I was in the neighborhood. Of course he was. I stepped aside. "Come in." He walked in like someone used to the space, but not quite at home in it anymore. His eyes darted toward the kitchen, then the hall, as if scanning for signs of disorder or drama. "You've been quiet lately," he said as he sat down at the dining table. "I've had a lot to think about." He cleared his throat. "Look, if this is about what I said—" "It is," I interrupted gently. "But not just that," he blinked. "It's about years of providing," I continued, "of showing up, paying, fixing, bending backward to be useful, and slowly watching myself disappear in the process." He sat back, arms crossed loosely. Not defensive yet, but not open either. "I didn't do it to be owed," I said, "but I thought somewhere deep down that love would make room for me." Jeff looked down at the table. A tiny chip in the wood caught his gaze. "Sandra's been tense," he muttered. "It's been a hard year, and I understand that. I've understood that every year since you were born." His jaw tensed. "Jeff," I said, "when you told Sandra I wasn't a priority, you weren't saying something new. You were naming a truth that's been growing between us for a long time." He didn't speak. I leaned forward, elbows resting gently on the table. "You wanted to know why the accounts were frozen, why the payments stopped. It's because I needed to find out what part of our relationship existed without them." He looked up then. His eyes were uncertain, and he asked quietly. I smiled, not bitterly, but not with warmth either. "We're about to find out." We sat in silence. The kind of silence that isn't awkward, just full, heavy with things we hadn't said in years. "Lucy told me you changed your will." "Yes." He nodded slowly, a long breath leaving his chest. "And you gave her the trust." "Yes." Another pause. "She's young," he said. "She doesn't know how complicated this all is. She knows enough to show up. She knows enough to ask how I'm doing without asking for anything." I could see his mouth twitch like he wanted to argue but couldn't find solid ground. He stood suddenly, pushing back the chair. "Okay," he said. I wanted to say I didn't mean it the way it sounded." "Jeff," I said gently, "you did." He looked at me then, not as a child looks at a parent, but as a man looks at a person he doesn't quite understand. "I'll call you," he said. "You always say that." He hesitated at the door. "Can I still come by?" "Of course, as my son, not as my dependent." He nodded once, left. When the door closed behind him, I let myself sit still for a long time. My coffee had gone cold on the counter. I didn't reheat it. The visit hadn't hurt as much as I feared, but it hadn't healed anything either. It simply clarified. Later that evening, I took out a clean page in my notebook and wrote, "There are wounds that don't bleed. They just reshape you." On Monday, I stayed home. Not because I was tired, though I was. Not because I had chores, though I did. I stayed home because I wanted to know what quiet felt like when it wasn't forced. It rained that morning, a steady cleansing kind of rain, the kind that makes you want to light a candle for no reason. I did just that, a cedar-scented one from a drawer I rarely opened. I brewed coffee, not from habit, but from choice, and sat by the window with my model ship in my lap. The trawler for Lucy was nearly done, just the rigging and painting left. By noon, I checked the mailbox. It was habit mostly. Bills, junk mail, a flyer about roof repair, then a pale blue envelope without a return address. Inside, a folded card plain on the outside. Inside, Sandra's handwriting. "Leo, I'd appreciate a conversation when you're bratty about recent decisions. I believe misunderstandings have caused some damage. I hope we can repair things, Sandra." I read it twice, then slid it back into the envelope and placed it under the stack of coupons I'd never use. There was no "I'm sorry," no "we've hurt you," just misunderstandings, as if I'd misplaced a receipt, not been sidelined in my own life. By mid-afternoon, the phone rang. Not Jeff, not Sandra, Lucy. "Hi, Grandpa," she said. Her voice was softer than usual, cautious. "Dad came home really quiet yesterday. Did he tell you he visited?" "Yes, he looked like he'd been through something." I smiled faintly. "He has." She was quiet for a moment. "He said you were different. I am different." "How?" I stopped believing that loving someone means losing yourself. Lucy was quiet again, then slowly. "I'm glad you didn't lose yourself for me." I let that sit between us for a long breath. After we hung up, I returned to the living room. It was getting darker, the clouds thick and silver. I lit another candle, opened the windows just a crack, and let the breeze carry in the scent of wet pavement and pine. I thought about Sandra's note, about Jeff's arch silence, about how some people apologize with words and others just leave the door cracked open and wait. But I wasn't waiting anymore. Instead, I found the manila envelope from Gerald Monroe, my lawyer. The trust documents were there, notarized, final. I held them for a moment, not like a weapon, but like a shield. I had something of my own now. Not just money, but boundaries, direction. A new chapter that didn't start with someone else's needs. That night, I pulled out an old shoebox from the top of the closet. It held all the letters I'd written and never sent, mostly to Jeff, a few to myself. One addressed to who I was before everything. I read one from 2012. Jeff had just taken out a second mortgage. I had covered it. The letter was short. "I hope this helps. I know you're trying. I just want you to know that I see you. I still remember when you couldn't tie your shoes. I'm proud of you always. Dad." I folded it again, pressed the edges tight. I wasn't sorry for giving, but I was done believing that giving should be endless. That evening, I wrote a new letter to the man who made it through. "You were never just a father. You were a builder, a protector, a compass. They forgot, but you didn't. And now you remember. Let that be enough." I placed it in the box on top of all the others. Then I turned off the lights, sat by the open window, and listened to the rain. Tuesday morning brought a strange quiet, not silence. There were birds outside, the low hum of a lawnmower on the next street, the usual tick of the hallway clock, but a different kind of stillness inside me. Not sadness, not numbness, just a calm that came from having no more illusions left to lose. I spent most of the morning in the sunroom. That was always my favorite spot, even when no one else seemed to care for it. The windows faced the backyard, and the garden I once kept with such care had grown wild over the past few years. Jeff used to say we'd hire someone to maintain it. He never did. I liked it better now, in truth. Overgrown, unruly, free. I was pruning dead leaves from a potted fern when the doorbell rang again. Not Jeff, not Lucy, Sandra. I opened the door without expression. She stood there in a navy blazer and shoes that looked expensive and uncomfortable. She held a white paper bag in one hand. "I brought donuts," she said, "from that place on Sycamore you used to like." I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, carefully, like someone entering a museum. Her eyes scanned the house, not judgmental, but observant. It had probably been 3 years since her last visit. "I didn't come to argue," she said, placing the bag on the kitchen counter. "I just thought maybe we could talk." I didn't offer coffee, didn't ask her to sit. She cleared her throat. "Jeff's been upset. I think he's trying, but he doesn't always know how." I nodded. "Neither do I some days." Sandra hesitated. "I read your note, the one in the will document." Lucy showed me. That startled me. "I didn't know she asked me to read it," Sandra said quickly. "She said I needed to." We stood in silence. She looked smaller than usual. Or maybe I just wasn't shrinking anymore. "I know I haven't made you feel welcome," she said after a moment. "I was never good at that. I didn't grow up with closeness. I never knew how to share space with someone who doesn't expect anything." "I didn't expect anything at first," I said, "just to be included." Sandra looked down. "That's fair." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a note in her handwriting. "I wrote this last night, not because I think a letter fixes everything, but I thought maybe you deserve to see me trauma." I took the note and placed it on the table without opening it. Not out of coldness, but because I wasn't ready to believe her yet. Maybe later. "I'm sorry," she added, voice thinner now, "for all the small ways I made you feel less. That stayed with me, for all the small ways." She left quietly after that. No hugs, no promises, just a quiet exit and a quick, almost fearful glance over her shoulder, as if she wasn't sure whether I'd call her back or let her go. I didn't call her back, but I did sit at the table, staring at her note for a long time. Later that day, Lucy came by again. She didn't mention Sandra's visit. Instead, she pulled out a book and started reading aloud while I finished the last detail on her model ship. By sunset, the mast was painted. "I've never had something made just for me," she said, holding it carefully. It was a little intricate the way she liked. She held it up once in the hallway mirror. "I look like someone loved me." "You do," I said softly. She hugged me then, not politely, not briefly, fully, like I wasn't someone fragile, but someone solid. When she left, I finally opened Sandra's letter. It wasn't long, just a few lines written in that neat script of hers. "I think I've been afraid of you, of needing you, of being reminded that I didn't build this family alone, but you were always there. And I see now that it wasn't your presence that overwhelmed me. It was your steady hand and how little I offered in return." Wednesday was the day I usually drove to the hardware store on Maple and 5th, a small place where the staff still remembered my name and helped me find obscure parts. But this time I stood in the aisle by the gardening tools longer than usual, staring at a new type of hedge trimmer Jeff used to like. I used to buy 2 at a time, one for me, one for their garage. I put it back on the shelf. When I came home, I found an envelope tucked into my screen door, my name in Jeff's handwriting. No stamp, no address, just paper folded by a hand I knew better than my own. I didn't open it immediately. I left it on the hall table beside the lamp he broke when he was 9 and glued back together with glittery school glue. Instead, I made stew, beef and barley. It was the one Lucy always asked for in winter. Though it was mid-spring now, I diced slowly, methodically. Every sound in the kitchen, the knife, the simmer, the quiet hum of the fridge felt louder than usual, like the house was breathing again. After dinner, I sat at the dining table with the envelope in front of me. I opened it. "Dad," it began, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said and about what you didn't. I want to explain, but I'm afraid explanations sound like excuses, and I know you've had enough of those." He was right. I think I let Sandra's boundaries become mine. I let our pace become a wall between us. I told myself I was protecting you from tension, but I was just making room for my own comfort. I failed you there. There was a part of me, still small, still bruised, that wanted to cry at that, but I didn't. I miss being your son. I mean, really, being your son, not just the person who calls twice a month or shows up when he needs help. I've been thinking about when I was little and how safe I felt around you. That safety didn't come from money or meals. It came from you never withholding anything. Not your time, not your concern, not your love. And I've withheld everything in return. That line stopped me. I read it again. "I want to rebuild something with you. I don't know how, but if you'll let me, I'd like to try. Not because I want back what I lost, but because I want to learn how to give the way you did, even if it's late." It ended there, no signature, no love, Jeff. Just that single sentence, even if it's late. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the shoebox with the others. Not to bury it, but to hold it close. It didn't undo the past, but it meant the silence might finally be cracking. That night, I dreamed of the backyard as it once was. Jeff at 7, chasing fireflies. Lucy, smaller in a dress with pockets, clapping when one landed on her palm. I stood at the porch watching. There was no fence, just grass and light, in a breeze that didn't sting. When I woke, the air was still warm, and I wasn't afraid of hoping. Thursday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. I was cleaning my workshop in the garage when I heard the knock. 2 sharp taps, then one softer, like someone unsure if they should be there. I opened the door, expecting Lucy or maybe even Jeff again. But it was my neighbor, Henry. He and I had shared a fence for over 30 years, traded tools and gossip in equal measure, but we drifted in recent years. I don't think we'd had a real conversation since his wife passed. "I saw someone slip a letter in your door yesterday," he said, stepping inside without waiting. "Didn't look like junk mail." "It wasn't," I replied, motioning toward the kitchen. He sat at the table like he'd never stopped doing it, resting his elbows on the worn wood. His eyes were still sharp, though his hair had gone whiter than mine. "So?" he asked. I poured him coffee. "So what? Did he apologize?" I raised an eyebrow. "You knew." Henry snorted. "Leo, we've both lived too long not to notice the ways our children stopped looking at us. They stopped needing us. Yes, but worse, they stopped respecting us. That's harder to bear." I sat across from him, suddenly 12 years old again, being lectured by someone who knew better. "I never told you," he continued, "but my son once asked me to sell my house and move into an age-appropriate facility. Said it would be easier for everyone. You know what I said?" I shook my head. "I wiped your behind for 3 years. You can let me die in my own house." He smiled, unbothered. He didn't bring it up again. I laughed. The first full laugh in days. It felt strange on my face. He leaned forward, his voice softer now. You did the right thing. Whatever it was, you did it. I saw it in your eyes. You're not shrinking anymore. I felt something settle inside me. Then a confirmation. Not that I was right, but that I was real, seen, not ridiculous, not dramatic, just a man who finally stepped into his own life again. After Henry left, I pulled on a jacket and went out back. The garden was overgrown, yes, but parts of it still bloomed. I knelt slowly, my knees protesting, and cleared a patch of wild grass around the lilies. They were stubborn, those flowers. Coming back year after year, no matter how neglected, I was brushing dirt from my palms when I saw Lucy standing by the fence. Need help? She called. She climbed through the gate without waiting for an answer, carrying 2 mugs of lemonade. We sat on the porch steps, sticky from the spring air, watching the light stretch long across the yard. Dad told me you read the letter, she said quietly. I nodded. She didn't ask what I thought. She just waited. He's trying, I finally said. I don't know if it's enough, but it's more than nothing. Lucy turned her mug in her hands. Sometimes people start late. Doesn't mean they shouldn't still be allowed to start. I looked at her. She had that same tilt in her head Jeff used to have when he was her age. That blend of doubt and hope. Did I give too much? I asked more to the sky than to her. Lucy didn't answer right away. Then slowly, you gave what you had. That's not the same as giving too much. We sat there until the sun dipped low. Before she left, Lucy kissed my cheek and said, "You're my blueprint, Grandpa." And somehow that mattered more than anything else I'd heard all week. Friday started like most days. Coffee, the crossword, slippers I refused to replace. But something felt different. The air in the house was lighter. Or maybe it was just me. I hadn't slept well, but I didn't feel tired. There was something under my skin humming like a quiet current. Anticipation, perhaps, or preparation. At 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Jeff again. He stood with a cautious smile, holding a paper bag. "Coffee and bagels," he said. "From that place on Sycamore you used to like." "You remembered," I said. He winced a little. "Lucy reminded me." I let him in. He moved slower this time, as if careful not to impose. He glanced at the furniture like it might have changed since his last visit. It hadn't, but something in him had. "I've been thinking," he said as we sat down, "about how you must have felt these past few years." I didn't interrupt. He needed to say it his way. "I think I took you for granted," he continued. "Maybe I thought you'd always be there, and maybe I didn't want to face how much I still needed you." He paused. "I know I said you weren't a priority, and that was cruel. It wasn't even true. Not really. It was just convenient." I looked at him, really looked. He wasn't the boy I raised, but he wasn't quite the man I'd grown distant from either. Somewhere in the middle, trying to choose who he wanted to be. "I want to start showing up," he said. "Not for money, not when things fall apart, just because you matter to me." I didn't respond right away. I broke the bagel in half. Everything bagel, the kind I used to get on Sundays when he was little. "You don't get to make a speech and erase the last decade," I said gently. "I know, but you can show up again quietly, repeatedly. That's how trust gets built back." He nodded, his eyes were glassy. I poured him coffee. It was the first time I'd done that in years without feeling obligated. We spent the rest of the morning talking about nothing and everything. The neighbor's new dog, a roof leak he was finally fixing, Lucy's plan to apply for grad school, ordinary things, soft things. As he was leaving, he stopped at the door. "I know you changed the will," he said. I met his eyes. "I didn't come to ask you to change it back." I raised an eyebrow. "I came to ask if someday when you're ready, we could talk about what it means to earn a place in it." That stunned me more than any apology could. Later, I sat at my desk and opened the drawer that held the updated documents. I didn't touch them, just looked at the folder, then closed it again. That evening, I made dinner for one, but I set 2 places, not because I expected anyone, but because I was no longer shrinking to fit an empty chair. Saturday came with sunshine and birdsong, the kind of morning that used to slip past unnoticed. I sat on the back porch with my coffee wrapped in the old wool blanket I hadn't used since my wife's funeral. I'd kept it buried in the bottom drawer for years, as if softness were something I wasn't allowed anymore. But today, I wanted it. I wanted to feel the weight of something that had once held me during sorrow, and now, quietly, was holding me through something else. Around 10, Lucy arrived. She carried a small cardboard box. "Photos," she said, grinning. "We're doing a slideshow for my final project, and I figured you might have the best ones." I let her in and we sat cross-legged on the living room floor like she was 6 again. She opened the box and began sorting. Me holding baby Jeff, Jeff in a Halloween costume too big for him, my wife in her paint-stained jeans by the old shed. "Grandpa," she said, holding up one photo. "Who's this with you?" It was me. Hair longer, smile tired but soft, standing beside a younger man in a factory uniform. "That's my friend Paul. I said we worked together. He moved away years ago, Texas, I think. You looked happy." I was tired, but yes, happy. Lucy stared at the picture. "You were a whole person before Dad and I, huh?" That made me laugh. "Yes, I was." She paused. "I forget that sometimes. Most people do. That's why you have to remind them gently, firmly." She nodded. We spent 2 hours flipping through memories. When she left, she hugged me the same way she had before, tight and certain. Later that day, I went to the closet and pulled out the box labeled Old Correspondence. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside were letters from my wife, postcards from Paul, thank you notes from apprentices I'd mentored at the factory. I read one from a young man named Mark, dated 1989. "You taught me how to measure twice and cut once. You taught me patience. I'll never forget it." I pressed the card to my chest. I had forgotten that version of me, the one who wasn't a father or a bank, just a steady hand in someone else's storm. That night after dinner, I received a text from Jeff. "Would you be okay if I came by tomorrow morning to help in the garden?" I stared at the screen. Not, "Can you help me?" Not, "I need something," just, "Can I help you?" It was simple, small, but it mattered. I replied, "Bring gloves. The lilies are stubborn this year." I turned off the lights early and sat by the window. Outside, a soft wind stirred the branches, and somewhere an owl called once, then fell silent. I thought about what it meant to be needed and what it meant to be chosen instead. Sunday morning arrived crisp and bright, the kind of light that makes even dust look gentle. I was already outside when Jeff pulled up, knees in the dirt, wide-brimmed hat shading my face, garden gloves caked from the early digging. He stepped out of the car with a pair of his own gloves, and for once, he didn't look like a man about to do something uncomfortable. He looked like a son. "I brought mulch," he said, lifting 2 bags from the trunk. Figured it was overdue. I didn't comment on the gesture. I just nodded and pointed to the patch near the fence. We worked side by side for nearly an hour. No music, no small talk, just the occasional instruction, "That one's not a weed," or "Be careful by the roots." I was surprised by how quickly we fell into rhythm. His hands, though less practiced, moved with effort. He didn't ask to be praised. He didn't check his phone. When we paused for water, I handed him a glass and sat down on the porch step. "Remember when you planted a row of carrots and forgot to label them?" I asked. He smiled. "I thought they were weeds and yanked them out." "You cried for an hour." He laughed, wiping sweat from his brow. "You let me believe for weeks that they just hadn't sprouted yet. I didn't want you to feel like you'd failed." He sat beside me then, a little closer than before. "You always covered for me," he said quietly, "even when you shouldn't have." I didn't respond, not with words. After a long moment, he said, "I don't want that anymore. I want to see things as they are, even when it's uncomfortable." That mattered more than any apology. Later, while he pulled weeds, I trimmed back the climbing ivy. The sun had risen higher, and the air was warmer now, but not heavy. I moved slower than I used to, but I didn't feel old. I felt steady. When we finished, he stood and looked at the yard. "It's coming back," he said. "It was always here," I replied. "Just needed space to breathe." He nodded, then asked, "Can we do this again next week?" I looked at him. "Do you want to?" "Yes," he said, "I do." That afternoon after he left, I showered and changed into a clean shirt and sturdy trousers I hadn't worn in years. Pale blue, soft cotton. I let my hair dry in the sun and sat by the open window with a fresh notebook. On the first page I wrote, "Today my son worked beside me, not because he had to, not because I asked, because he wanted to." There is a difference between being needed and being valued. I am learning it late, but I am learning it. I closed the notebook and placed it in the desk drawer beside the trust papers and the letter from Sandra. That evening, Lucy called. I saw Dad's shoes in the garage. "Muddy," she said, teasing. "He helped in the garden," I told her. She was quiet for a beat. "Good, I think he needed that." So did I. We talked for a while. Nothing deep, nothing dramatic, just enough. Before we hung up, she said, "Grandpa, yes, I think you're becoming someone new." "No," I said. "I think I'm becoming someone I used to be before I forgot myself." Outside, the light faded. The lilies by the fence caught the last of it, bent, but blooming. Monday came with quiet purpose. I spent the morning in the attic, something I hadn't done in years. The ladder creaked under me. Dust floated thick in the sunbeams, and boxes lined the walls like old friends I'd once known and stopped calling. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe nothing. Maybe just proof that my life had roots. I found a box labeled Jeff's School. Inside, spelling bee certificates, a Pinewood Derby car, drawings of lopsided houses labeled home. I sat cross-legged on the floor holding one crayon portrait, 3 figures hand in hand. One was clearly me, short hair, sturdy build. One was Jeff. The third was his mother. Jeff had drawn her in even though by then she was already gone. Children draw what they wish for. Under the papers, I found a birthday card I didn't remember. It was signed. "Thanks for everything, Dad. I know I don't say it enough. No year, no envelope. Just that." I held it carefully. It wasn't everything, but it was something. Downstairs, the phone rang. I let the machine catch it. Henry's voice filled the room. "Leo, I'm heading to the community center later. There's a legal aid talk. You mentioned reviewing your documents. Let me know if you want to come. I didn't need advice, but I appreciated the offer." People were beginning to see me again. Not as fragile, not as a shadow in his own house, as a person. That afternoon, I opened the trust folder. Everything was in order. Lucy's name was clear, firm. There were clauses for healthcare, contingencies, timelines. I had done it carefully, but now I wanted to do one more thing. I called Gerald, my lawyer. "I'd like to add a clause," I told him. "An addendum?" He asked what kind. "A letter," I said. "Not legal, just personal. I want it attached to the documents. Something Lucy will read one day. Not now, later, when it matters." He didn't ask questions. He just said, "Bring it in when you're ready." So I wrote to Lucy, "You have my name, my voice, my quiet strength. You have my resilience, though you may not always feel it. I want you to know that none of this home, this choice, this legacy, is meant to burden you. It's meant to remind you that you were always the one who saw me whole. When others took pieces, you stayed gentle. And from that gentleness, I found something stronger than I knew I had. Keep choosing love that costs nothing. And set boundaries where love expects payment. And never, ever forget that you were my turning point. Not because I gave to you, but because you gave back." I signed it with my full name. Not Grandpa, not Dad, just me. That night, I sat by the window again. No candle this time. No pen. Just the sound of wind in the trees and a feeling I hadn't had in years. Like I was ready. Not to let go, but to move forward. Outside, the garden was growing wild and green, just the way I liked it. A little tangled, a little stubborn, but alive. Tuesday came with soft skies and a breeze that smelled like lilac and something older. Like a memory you didn't know you still had. I woke early, not from restlessness, but from something quieter, readiness. There was nothing I needed to do, and yet I dressed with care. A long-sleeve shirt, sturdy jeans, my old watch I hadn't worn since Lucy's middle school graduation. I was sipping coffee by the window when the doorbell rang. Not a visitor this time, a delivery. A small box with my name and no note. I brought it inside, set it on the table, opened it slowly. Inside was a photo framed, Jeff maybe 10 years old, sitting on my lap, both of us mid-laugh. A real laugh, not posed. I didn't remember the photo being taken, but I remembered the moment. The way he leaned into me like he still believed I could fix everything. There was something else beneath the frame, a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it, found this in a drawer I hadn't touched in years. I wanted you to have it, not because it makes up for anything, just because it's real. And I think we both need real. No signature, just that. I sat for a long time with that photo in my lap, my fingers curled around the frame like it might shatter. I didn't cry, but my breath caught once, and I let it. Later that day, I decided to make dinner. Not because someone was coming, not to prove anything, just for the joy of it. I roasted chicken, made biscuits from scratch, even pulled the preserves from the back shelf that I'd been saving for years. The house smelled like something warm was healing. At 5, the phone rang. "Hey," Jeff said. "Lucy and I were wondering, would it be all right if we stopped by just for a bit? We won't stay long." I looked at the 2 place settings on the table, then at the pot on the stove. "You'll stay for dinner," I said. "I've made too much." There was a pause, then, "Okay, thank you." They arrived an hour later, both carrying something. Jeff had a basket of fresh herbs. Lucy brought a notebook and handed it to me. "I've started writing about you," she said, cheeks slightly pink. "Not as a character, as a presence, a constant." I didn't know what to say, so I just held it. Dinner was simple, quiet, good. We didn't speak of the will or money or the long shadows between us. We talked about food and books and the garden. Jeff asked how I got the biscuits so light. I told him it was just cold butter and not overthinking. Afterward, Lucy helped with the dishes, humming softly. Jeff stepped out to the porch. When I joined him, he was standing with his hands in his pockets, looking out at the yard. "You ever think," he said, "that maybe we both forgot how to reach for each other?" I didn't answer right away. Then we didn't forget. We just got tired of reaching without being met. He nodded slowly. "I want to be better at that." "You are, Jeff. You're starting to be." He turned toward me, something close to peace in his eyes. "I know I've lost things," he said, "and I know I don't get to claim them just because I've changed my mind. But if you ever feel like there's room again, I'd be grateful." I looked at him, this grown man I'd once bathed, fed, defended, and later distanced. "There's room," I said, "but not the kind you fill by accident. The kind you earn by staying," he nodded. Before they left, Lucy hugged me like she always did, whole, full, without reservation. Jeff hugged me too. For the first time in a long time, it wasn't stiff or half-hearted. It was a son's hug. After the door closed behind them, I stood in the kitchen with the leftover warmth still in the air. I picked up Lucy's notebook and opened to the first page. "He is not a symbol. He is not a ghost. He is the breath between generations, the silence that holds the weight, and the hand that never dropped the thread." I closed the book, heart full in a way I hadn't felt in decades. Tomorrow, I would walk to the post office. I had a letter for Gerald, not to change anything, just to add one more clause, one that said, "In case he truly comes home, not just to visit, but to stay." I would like to leave the door unlocked. Wednesday morning, I woke with the light already spilling across the floor. No alarms, no plans, just a full breath in the steady rhythm of my own feet as I moved through the house. I opened windows. I changed the linens. I watered the lilies. It felt like ceremony, though no one else would have seen it that way. By mid-morning, I walked to the post office with the letter for Gerald, a final adjustment to the documents. Not to change the will, but to expand it, to acknowledge something living. Not forgiveness, not reversal, just possibility. The clerk behind the counter was young, cheerful, asked if I needed tracking. I told him, "No, not everything needs to be watched. Some things you just send and trust they'll arrive." On the way home, I stopped at the corner cafe. I hadn't sat there in years. The waitress didn't recognize me, but she smiled kindly when I ordered. I took my coffee outside, sat beneath the faded green awning, and watched the world pass. At the next table, two men about my age were talking quietly. One of them mentioned his son, the other his bad knee. I listened, not because I meant to eavesdrop, but because the sound of older men taking up space without apology felt like something holy. When I got home, I changed into gardening clothes and went out back. The yard was blooming now, not neatly, not perfectly, but fully. The hydrangeas had burst open. The lilies swayed in the breeze like they'd been waiting for someone to notice. I knelt beside them and dug my hands into the earth. I thought of the years I'd given and the ways I'd been erased. I thought of the silence I had swallowed, the dinners I had cooked for people who didn't say thank you, the moments I waited by a phone that never rang. And then I thought of Lucy, of her laughter, her notebook, her quiet presence. I thought of Jeff, not as the boy I raised, but as the man he was trying to become. And I thought of me, not as a background character, not as an obligation, but as a man who had reclaimed himself in the second act. The sun was warm on my back. I didn't feel old. I felt rooted. That afternoon, I baked a cake, just a simple vanilla one. I frosted it with what I had, nothing fancy. I wrote one word on top, not with icing, but with a single line of blueberries. Still, because I was still here, still becoming, still enough. That evening, I set the table for one, not out of loneliness, out of celebration. I lit a candle, I served a slice, and I wrote one last thing in my notebook. There comes a time when you stop asking to be seen and start seeing yourself. I am no one's second thought. I am not background music in someone else's story. I am the voice that kept singing when the room went quiet. To anyone reading this, if they forget you, remember yourself. If they love you only when you are useful, step back. If you've poured into others until you're empty, sit, rest, refill. You are not too late. You are not too much. You are not done. You're still. And if this story held something true for you, share it. Send it to the man who needs to remember who he is. Leave a comment. Tag a friend. Let someone else feel seen. Because maybe they've been quiet for too long. And maybe today is the day they begin again.